Once upon a time, in a small village nestled among the rolling hills, there lived a young man named Samurai, a man whose outward strength and discipline stood in sharp contrast to the storm that constantly raged within his mind. For Samurai was known throughout the village, not for calm wisdom, but for his restless thoughts that never seemed to rest even for a moment. As he was always thinking, analyzing, remembering mistakes of the past, imagining fears of the future, and replaying conversations that no longer mattered, so much so that even in moments of silence his mind felt noisy and crowded, and despite having skill, respect, and a decent life, he could never truly find peace. The villagers often saw Samurai walking alone at dawn or late at night, his eyes distant, his expression tense, as if he were constantly fighting an invisible battle, and though many admired his discipline, few understood the weight he carried inside. Samurai himself often wondered why his mind refused to be still, why happiness felt temporary, and why worries seemed to return the moment one problem faded, until one evening while sitting near the village well, listening to traveling merchants speak of distant lands, he overheard a story that would quietly change the direction of his life, a story about a renowned Zen master who lived on top of a distant mountain far beyond the rolling hills, a master said to possess deep wisdom and the rare ability to guide troubled minds toward inner peace and true tranquility. The merchants spoke of people who climbed the mountain burdened with sorrow, fear, and confusion, and returned lighter, calmer, and clearer, as if something heavy had been lifted from their souls. And as Samurai listened, something stirred within him, a mixture of curiosity, hope, and desperation, because despite his doubts he felt that if anyone could help him understand his restless mind, it would be this Zen master. That very night Samurai made his decision, not out of impulse but out of quiet resolve, believing that if peace truly existed, he was willing to endure any hardship to find it, and so at first light he prepared for the journey, leaving behind familiar paths and comforts, carrying only what was necessary, and setting his gaze toward the distant mountain that stood like a silent guardian against the sky. The journey itself was long and arduous, filled with steep paths, changing weather, aching muscles, and moments where Samurai questioned his choice, especially when fatigue amplified his thoughts and doubts, whispered that peace was an illusion. Yet each step forward felt like a declaration of intent, and with every mile he walked he reflected on his life, his habits, and the way his mind clung so tightly to control and certainty. Days passed as Samurai climbed higher, the air growing thinner and quieter, the sounds of the village replaced by wind and birds, until finally, after enduring exhaustion and solitude, he reached the top of the mountain where the Zen master was said to live. And there he found not a grand palace or fortress, but a simple, peaceful setting that immediately felt different from anything he had known, a place where silence did not feel empty but full. In this tranquil space, Samurai saw the Zen master sitting quietly, his posture relaxed, yet dignified, his eyes closed in deep meditation, radiating a calm presence that seemed untouched by time or worry, and for the first time in a long while, Samurai felt hesitant, as if standing before something vast and unfamiliar. Yet he gathered himself, approached respectfully, and bowed deeply, his heart pounding as he spoke honestly from a place of vulnerability, addressing the master and confessing that his mind was restless, that peace always escaped him, and that he had come seeking guidance, asking whether it was truly possible to empty the mind of endless thoughts. The Zen master slowly opened his eyes and looked at Samurai, not with judgment or surprise, but with a gentle, knowing smile, as if he had heard these words countless times before, and after a moment of silence he replied calmly that if Samurai wished to learn, he was willing to teach him, but that the path would not be what Samurai expected. Without further explanation, the master rose and motioned for Samurai to follow, leading him through a small courtyard adorned with a simple yet beautiful garden, where every stone, plant, and pathway seemed intentionally placed. And in the center of this courtyard stood a large stone basin filled completely to the brim with clear water, reflecting the sky above like a mirror. Samurai watched silently as the master picked up a wooden ladle, dipped it gently into the basin, lifted it carefully, and poured the water into a much smaller empty bowl placed nearby, performing the action slowly and deliberately, as if demonstrating more than just a physical task. Turning to Samurai, the master explained that this would be his lesson, instructing him to empty the entire basin by transferring all the water into the small bowl without spilling a single drop. And as Samurai looked from the overflowing basin to the small bowl, confusion crept into his expression because the task seemed impossible. Yet trusting the master and determined to succeed, he accepted tea. He challenged without argument, believing that discipline and effort would carry him through as they always had. Taking the ladle in his hands, Samurai began scooping water from the basin and pouring it into the bowl with great care, focusing intensely on precision, control, and speed, convinced that if he worked hard enough he could solve the problem. And for hours he continued this process, scoop after scoop, his arms growing tired, his patience thinning. Yet no matter how much water he transferred, the basin never seemed to empty, and with every failed attempt, frustration tightened its grip around his chest. As time passed, Samurai's movements grew sharper and more forceful, his breathing heavier, his thoughts louder, questioning why the task made no sense, why the master would give such an impossible instruction, and whether this journey had been a mistake, while his mind became even more restless than before, filled with irritation, self-criticism, and doubt, unaware that the true lesson had already begun. The hours seemed to blur together, and with every scoop of water his frustration deepened, not only because the basin refused to empty, but because the familiar patterns of his restless mind began to overwhelm him once again, replaying thoughts of failure, impatience, and self-doubt, telling him that he was not good enough, that he was wasting his time, and that peace was something meant for others but never for him, until finally his movements lost their rhythm and his shoulders slumped under the invisible weight he had carried his entire life. It was then that the Zen master, who had been observing quietly from a distance with a compassionate and steady gaze, approached Samurai and gently placed a hand on his shoulder, a simple touch that felt grounding and unexpectedly comforting. And in a calm, almost whisper-like voice, the master spoke, calling Samurai his AR student, and explaining that while he was trying desperately to empty the basin, he had forgotten the first and most crucial step, which was to empty his own mind. These words struck Samurai with confusion rather than clarity, and he looked up at the master with tired eyes, openly admitting that he did not understand how one could possibly empty the mind when thoughts seemed to arise on their own without permission. The Zen master smiled warmly, not as someone amused, but as someone deeply understanding, and patiently explained that emptying the mind did not mean forcing thoughts to disappear or fighting against them, but rather letting go of worries, fears, and attachments, releasing the constant need to control outcomes, and learning to focus completely on the present moment instead, being pulled apart by memories of the past or anxieties about the future. He advised Samurai to stop struggling, to stop trying so hard to succeed, and instead to simply be present with the task itself, to feel the weight of the ladle, to hear the sound of the water, and to allow each movement to happen naturally, trusting the process rather than resisting it. Taking these words to heart, Samurai closed his eyes for a brief moment and took a deep breath, feeling the cool mountain air fill his lungs. And for the first time since arriving, he consciously let go of his frustration, releasing the tight grip he had on expectations and results. When he opened his eyes again and resumed the task, something had subtly changed, as his movements became slower, gentler, and more intentional, and instead of counting scoops or worrying about whether the basin was emptying, he focused solely on the present sensation of lifting and pouring water, noticing the soft sound it made as it flowed, the way light reflected on its surface, and the calm rhythm that naturally emerged. Gradually, Samurai entered a state of flow, a quiet mental space where thoughts no longer competed for attention, and his mind felt clear and spacious, as if the noise that once dominated it had finally faded into the background. In this state of calm awareness, something miraculous began to happen, not because the laws of nature had changed, but because Samurai's relationship with the task had transformed, and with each peaceful scoop, the water flowed effortlessly into the smaller bowl without resistance, as if responding to his newfound tranquility, and little by little, the basin that once seemed endless began to empty. Time lost its meaning as Samurai remained fully present, unaware of how long he worked, until eventually he poured the final drop of water into the bowl and realized that the basin now stood empty before him. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of amazement, not only at the completion of the task, but at the stillness within himself, a stillness he had searched for his entire life yet never truly allowed to exist. Turning to the Zen master, Samurai bowed deeply, his heart filled with gratitude and humility, and the master, meeting his gaze, explained gently that when one empties the mind, one allows the universe to flow through them, becoming one with the task at hand, free from resistance and distraction. And it is then that clarity arises naturally, and everything falls into place without force. These words resonated deeply within Samurai, and he realized that the peace he had sought in distant places and external guidance had always existed within him, hidden beneath layers of overthinking, fear, and attachment, waiting patiently to be uncovered rather than achieved. As Samurai prepared to leave the mountain, he felt lighter than he ever had before, not because his life had suddenly become perfect, but because he now understood that peace was not found by controlling very thought, but by letting go and being fully present in each moment. From that day forward, wherever Samurai went, whether walking familiar village paths or facing new challenges, he carried the wisdom of the Zen master in his heart, reminding himself again and again that true clarity and tranquility come not from emptying the world around us, but from gently emptying the mind within. And through this understanding, he learned to live with calm awareness, resilience, and a quiet strength that no longer depended on the noise of restless thoughts.